Hello YouTube and welcome to Prime Productions. I'm here to help enhance your tabletop gaming experience. And welcome back to my Starfinder Primer series. If you're new to the channel, I've recently been putting out a series of videos to get people up to speed on the lore of the tabletop role-playing game Starfinder. Put out by Paizo, the same people that make Pathfinder, Starfinder is a science fantasy role-playing game set in the Pathfinder universe, but years in the future. So there are laser guns, but also still magic. If you haven't seen my previous two videos, I suggest you go check them out before watching this one, as information from those videos will be used in this video. So far I've put out videos on the basics of Starfinder and the 4 major factions, so today we are going to dive into the core aliens, or ancestries as Paizo calls them, for the upcoming Starfinder 2nd Edition playtest. Now there will be 10 ancestries to go over, so I put them into manageable chunks. I'm going to separate them into ancestries from the Pact Worlds, ancestries from the Veskarium, and miscellaneous ancestries. But before we get started, a few quick reminders. Starfinder 2nd Edition will use the Pathfinder 2nd Edition rule set mostly, so ancestries from Pathfinder should work mechanically at least in Starfinder. In Starfinder canon, most of the species of Galarian survived its disappearance, so elves, dwarves, goblins, etc., those ancestries are all still playable. I'm only just going to cover the ancestries that will be available in the Starfinder core book, but yeah, you can still play a space orc or whatever. So, first off, ancestries of the Pact Worlds. We're going to start with humans, the only ancestry that is both in Pathfinder and Starfinder core rulebooks. Anyone familiar with Pathfinder knows most of what there is to know about humans, including that they are medium-sized and that the human culture is wide and varied. In fact, human culture has been made more wide and varied since humanity spread out after the loss of their home planet of Galarian during the Gap. But it's clear humans took to the stars even before the Gap. There are human colonies, and the largest ancestry group on Absalom Station is human. There is one interesting thing about humans, and that is the Halki. Halki are humans, except they have vibrant, beet red skin. They are native to Akaton, which is like the Mars of the Galarian system, except it's, inhabitable. Except for their skin, Halki are identical to humans. The common theory is that humans used powerful magic to teleport from Galarian to Akaton thousands of years ago, and then evolved to have beet red skin. Others think that this is a case of convergent evolution, that humans just happen to evolve on both Galarian and Akaton at the same time. Regardless, Halki have the same mechanical stats as human, or at least they did in Starfinder 1st Edition. Also native to Akaton are the Ysoki, or rat folk, small, bipedal, rodent-like humanoids. Ysoki are actually in Pathfinder as well, but they are native to Akaton. Seems they did a reverse of the Halki, maybe, and some of their ancient ancestors teleported to Galarian. Man, between all of this and the Islanti from last week, teleporting between planets was surprisingly common in Pathfinder. Even the elves did it, but that's a story for another time. Anyway, Ysoki have low-light vision, and some famously have cheek pouches where they can store things, similar to some species of real-world rats. Culturally, they are kinda known for 2 things. One is that they don't have shame, or at least don't feel it in the same way as humans do. Ysoki are generally so confident in their own sense of self that they largely don't need status or view anything as unworthy of their attention. You probably will never hear a Ysoki say that a job or a concept is beneath them. The second thing that they are known for is tinkering and engineering. This leads some to sneaking onto starships and starting large Ysoki warrens. This would be a problem, but their tinkering skills allow them to MacGyver solutions to engineering problems, effectively repairing the ships they're on for free, so most people view it as a wash to have an uninvited Ysoki colony aboard. Of course, that's a generalization, and there certainly are Ysoki that don't fall into this stereotype. Moving on from Akaton, we have Castrovel, which is like the Venus of the Galarian system, except that it's a lush jungle planet and not filled with deadly toxic gas. Castrovel is home to the Lashunta, who are a medium-sized species that looks mostly like humans except for these antennae here. Lashunta have limited telepathy, which means that they can establish a telepathic connection with someone within 30 feet. Once they do, if the two share a language, they can communicate telepathically. Importantly, Lashunta cannot read minds, at least in this way. Instead, someone can choose what thoughts to send them and what thoughts to keep private. Lashunta culture is pretty varied like humans, though a common teaching among Lashunta is that you can learn something from any culture. This willingness to walk a mile in another species' shoes means that Lashunta tend to make good diplomats. Lashunta culture used to be matriarchal back in Pathfinder's day, but in Starfinder's time their political system is largely egalitarian. Now, I've explained this before, but Lashunta are dimorphic, which means that there are two very different Lashunta body types. At puberty, Lashunta differentiate based on the stresses they faced as a child. A child that had a lot of physical stresses, like running, jumping, climbing trees, develops into a Karasha Lashunta, who are physically oriented. A child that had a lot of mental stress, like doing a lot of academic study, develops into a Daimya Lashunta, who is more intellectual. Recently, it has been revealed that it is possible for a Lashunta not to differentiate, turning them into a third type of Lashunta called an Unbound Lashunta. Moving on to the final ancestry of the Pact Worlds, we have the Barathu. Player character Barathu are medium-sized, but we'll talk about that in a second. Barathu have an innate fly speed even at level 1, and also have that limited telepathy similar to what the Lashunta have. Barathu are largely peaceful and calm, and that's a direct result of their strange anatomy. Barathu are weird floating jellyfish creatures that live in a gas giant in the Galarian system. Barathu can merge with other Barathu and make hive mind super entities. These combined Barathu eventually reach the size of whales or even larger, but tend to be peaceful. This is actually how they tend to resolve disputes, by merging into one hive mind where their thoughts and feelings can be shared freely. Most Barathu live as part of these colonies, but occasionally some, usually younger Barathu, will separate out into individuals and go explore the multiverse. These are the younger, medium-sized Barathu you can play as. Alright, that's it for the Pact Worlds ancestries. These next three ancestries are all from worlds that are, or at least were, conquered by the Vesk. Firstly, the Vesk themselves. As I mentioned last time, Vesk are lizard-like aliens who are hulking but still medium-sized. Physically, the Vesk make very good warriors. They are tough, and many subspecies of Vesk have evolutionary adaptations that just make them good at combat, like having hard armor-like scales or having multiple natural attacks. Their physical gifts may be why they tend to be warmongers. They love war and conflict because it affords them the opportunity to gain glory on the battlefield. Now, not all Vesk are like that, true, but that's largely the direction their culture is headed. Another reason that the Vesk have spread out to conquer is that they have an overpopulation problem on Vesk Prime. Vesk tend to hatch in clutches of 3 to 7, and the Vesk culture highly regards familial bonds. In other words, families help each other survive, ensuring that there are more and more Vesk every generation. So they had to spread out from their homeworld in order to have enough resources. The next Veskarium race to talk about are the Skittermanders. Skittermanders are small, six-armed, vibrant-coated fluffballs. Skittermanders are almost all pathologically obsessed with helping. In fact, when the Vesk landed on the Skittermander home planet and said that they were going to conquer it, the Skittermanders said, "Great, how can we help?" This actually backfired on the Veskarium in the end. Because the Veskarium don't like to do paperwork because they'd rather, be battling, Skittermanders helpfully volunteer to take up the roles of bureaucratic paper pushers. This has ironically led many Skittermanders to be in positions of bureaucratic power over other Vesk. After all, your Vesk soldier will have a hard time fighting if the Skittermander quartermaster won't give you ammunition. Oh, another thing about Skittermanders is that they've kind of been adopted as the mascots of Starfinder, with a lot of Starfinder promotional art featuring Skittermanders heavily. Unlike the Skittermanders, our next species did not take well to being conquered by the Vesk. The Patra are a feline alien-like species from the planet of Polonus, also known as Vesk 6. Patra are normally medium-sized, but a recent release has shown that there are small-sized Patra as well. Patra culture is very family-focused with large clans. Their culture is also highly competitive, with a ritual taking place every year where 15-year-olds are sent out into the jungles of their planet to survive in a grueling trial. and how well one does on the trial, including how well one does against their fellow Patra, determines their life trajectory. One interesting thing of note is that the Patra home planet recently was liberated from Veskarium rule. Patra rebels and freedom fighters had been opposing the Vesk for generations, and with the Vesk's new war with the Aslanti, they just didn't have the resources necessary to keep Polonus or Vesk 6 in line. The planet didn't have many natural resources that the Vesk needed and was strategically unimportant, so the Vesk decided to abandon it, at least for the time being, in order to focus all their military might on the Aslanti. Now, we finally have the last 3 miscellaneous ancestries. The Kasatha are tall, though still medium-sized, 4-armed aliens from the planet of Kasoth. They evolved on a desert planet, and so, at least in Starfinder 1st Edition, are great at covering rocky terrain quickly. Culturally, Kasatha tend to be staunch traditionalists. One of those traditions, by the way, is that it is seen as obscene not to cover a Kasathan's mouth, though they don't hold other ancestries to that standard. Kasathans are not only beholden to traditions between generations, but also traditions within their lifetimes. Many Kasatha develop routines or rituals that they will do throughout their lifetime. It gets so that older Kasatha are sometimes so mired in these traditions that their entire day is filled with them. Of course, they do have respect for intergenerational traditions as well. In fact, they have a massive AI where they live, which contains bits of personality and memory from all the greatest Kasatha elders from the past. This AI can be consulted in times of great need. But we can't talk about the Kasatha without talking about the Idari. You see, when the Kasatha came out of the gap, they realized that their world was dying. Stuck on a desert planet with few natural resources, most Kasathans realized that they had only a few generations left before extinction. So they built a massive colony ship called the Idari that could transport millions of Kasatha off the planet. They were at that time visited by another alien species that told them that there was another planet ripe for colonization at that time, that planet being called Akaton, that one that the Yosoki are from. So the Idari set off. For some reason, it did not have a drift drive. Maybe it was just too big to be able to shunt into the drift. Anyway, it took them nearly 2.5 centuries to reach the Galarian system, and in that time, Akaton had recovered. So when the Kasatha got there, they didn't have a planet to colonize. They certainly didn't have the military power to conquer it, so they just kind of parked the Idari in orbit around the sun and asked to join the Pact Worlds. And they were let in. And that's kind of the story of the Kasatha. Moving on to the Shirin, they are medium-sized bug people, specifically locust people. They don't have much of a collective culture, but tend to revel in just having the ability to choose. You see, this stems from the Shirin origin story. Shirin are actually from the Swarm, those bug aliens I mentioned from last time. One colony of Swarm, for some reason, got a genetic mutation and were hatched without a connection to the Swarm hive mind. Instead, they had free will and sentience. They do retain a sliver of the hive mind's connection in the form of that same limited telepathy that Lashunta have, but otherwise they were free from the Swarm. The Shirin don't have much of a culture because, remember that mutation that made them have individuality? As far as anyone can tell, that happened during the gap. Yeah, there's no record of Shirin before the gap, and after the gap the Shirin woke up, realized what was going on, realized that the Swarm was just as confused as everyone else, and used that opportunity to escape. Alright, so I've saved the most confusing ancestry for last, androids. Androids are typically medium-sized, but in Starfinder 1st Edition they could be small or large-sized, and that's because androids can be built to represent any ancestry, from halflings to, theoretically, something as large as a minotaur. Most androids are human-shaped, though. Androids are biomechanical, meaning they have both mechanical and living bits. They also have a colony of self-repair nanites on them, allowing them to effectively live forever as long as the nanites continue to have the resources to keep powered up and repairing. Androids don't really have a culture per se, and that's because they're built, not born. That's actually the big commonality that androids all have together. Originally, they were used as slave labor. But over the years, and with a lot of political lobbying, they were eventually recognized as full citizens with all the rights and responsibilities associated with that, at least in the Pact Worlds. I couldn't find if androids had full rights and responsibilities in the Veskarium. Someone let me know in the comments below if you find any official word on that. Anyway, that's kind of the chief underlying cultural touchstone that most androids have in common, the love of and continuing struggle for independence. So let's get down to the real interesting thing about the androids. In Starfinder, and actually even in Pathfinder, sometimes constructs will attract a soul. This is sometimes how you get poppets in Pathfinder. Anyway, the more complex the construct, the more likely it is to attract a soul. On rare instances, even starships have gained a soul and the corresponding sentience and free will. Anyway, androids are basically so advanced that they always attract a soul. This is problematic for megacorporations that want cheap slave labor, so there's an ongoing problem of people still making and enslaving androids illegally. And those are going to be the 10 ancestries in the Starfinder 2 core rulebook. What did you think? Are there any that you are interested in playing? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're down there, remember to hit that like and subscribe button. That tells not only me, but also YouTube that you like this kind of content and would like to see more. And until next time, thank you, good luck, and happy gaming!